Good afternoon, distinguished speakers, moderator, and esteemed participants. On behalf of the Institute for Essential Services Reform, or IESR, I would like to warmly welcome all of you to today's webinar, which brings up the title of Towards the First ASEAN Summit, Philippine Chairship and the Future of Energy Transitions in Southeast Asia. My name is Benita Sasha, and I will be your master of ceremony for today's webinar. Our webinar today will begin with opening remarks, followed by presentations and discussion sessions with our invited experts. After that, we will have a Q&A sessions, and finally, we'll close with a summary and conclusions. Before we officially begin the webinar, I would like to kindly remind everyone to fill in the attendance and feedback form that we bundle into one form that will be shared in the chat box throughout the sessions. And also to remind everyone that the interpretation services will also be available during the webinar. Before we officially begin this webinar, let's take a quick group photo. Please turn on your camera so we can capture this moment together. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you to all speakers and participants for the group photo. Without further ado, I would like to invite Pak Agus Tampu Bolon, Director of Climate and Just Energy Transitions at the IESR, to deliver his opening remarks. Pak Agus, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, distinguished speakers, colleagues, partners, and participants from Indonesia, from other Southeast Asia countries. I would like to say thank you for joining us, for taking your time to convene at this moment to talk about the future of ASEAN, especially in the energy. As we know, Southeast Asia today is currently navigating multiple overlapping pressure from geopolitical tension, global energy price volatility, even escalating climate risks. Recent development, including conflict in the Middle East, have once again exposed a structural vulnerability that many of us are already familiar with, which is our continued dependence on imported fossil fuels. This dependence is not abstract. It translates directly into rising inflation, increasing the fiscal pressure, particularly from the energy subsidies, and growing concern over energy security and affordability across ASEAN member states. As many experts have pointed out, this situation is not accidental. It is the predictable outcome of a long-standing reliance on fossil fuels, combined with the slower needed transition toward more diversified and renewable energy systems. Now, across the Southeast Asia region, we see governments responding to this pressure, but it is often through a short-term measure, such as fuel subsidies and price controls. These responses are understandable, even necessary, to protect households and to stabilize economies. But here's the tension. If we only focus on the short-term fixes, we risk losing momentum on the long-term transformation. So the real question before us is not whether ASEAN should prioritize energy security or energy transition. The question is how we ensure that both move forward together. In fact, what this crisis really offers is a wake-up call, an opportunity to reduce structural dependence on fossil fuel imports, to accelerate renewable energy deployment, and to strengthen ASEAN's collective resilience and energy independence. This brings us to an important milestone ahead. In 2026, the Philippines will be the ASEAN chairmanship at a time of heightened uncertainty and public scrutiny. While sustainability and energy cooperation are part of its stated priorities, there are also concerns across regions. Will ongoing crises lead to a slowdown or even reversal of the energy transition efforts that we have been fighting so long? This is what makes this chairmanship especially consequential. Will ASEAN respond to crisis by doubling down on fossil fuel, or will it advancing credible and forward-looking clean energy solution? Under the theme of ASEAN Energy Assemble, there is a clear opportunity to move beyond rhetoric, to make tangible progress on regional initiatives such as the ASEAN Power Grid, to strengthen cooperation between countries and to mobilize investment that are aligned with climate and sustainability goals. As ASEAN moves toward its long-term vision, including the ASEAN Vision 2045, one thing becomes very clear. The region cannot afford symbolic commitments anymore without a real delivery. What matters is not how many declarations are being made, but what those declarations actually achieve. This is exactly why today's discussion matters. It is not about restarting the challenges. We already know the challenges. It is about ensuring that ASEAN does not lose direction, especially in this time of crisis. In this context, we from the Institute for Essential Services Reform, ISR, together with partners from the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Collaborative Network, SETC, is proposing the Southeast Asia Energy Transformation Initiative, or SEA-ETI, as a constructive way forward. SEA-ETI focuses on 4 interconnected pillars: accelerating clean energy deployment and regional integration. Number 2, positioning ASEAN as a clean energy manufacturing and trade hub. The third is strengthening green investment and financing. And number 4 is enhancing policy coordination alongside workforce development. These pillars are not meant to replace existing ASEAN framework, but to help translate political commitments into something more practical, implementable across region. In that sense, this initiative can serve as a complementary contribution to the Philippines' chairmanship in the energy sector. Today's webinar is part of that effort. We aim to assess current policy directions, reflect on regional progress, and explore how ASEAN can maintain momentum even in times of crisis. We also want to examine how the Philippines chairmanship can help deliver outcomes that are credible, forward-looking, and firmly aligned with clean energy transition. We are honored this afternoon to be joined by 4 distinguished speakers who will bring diverse perspectives to this conversation. There will be Mr. Benny Surjadi from the ASEAN Center for Energy, or ACE, Mr. Angelo Kairos de la Cruz from the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, ICSC, Philippines, Mr. Indra Overland from the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs, and my colleague, Mr. Arif Rosadi from ISR. I'm confident their insights will help ground our discussion in both regional realities and forward-looking solutions. I hope, and we hope, today's exchange will contribute meaningfully to ASEAN's ongoing energy dialogue, helping shape outcomes that are not only resilient and inclusive, but also aligned with the long-term sustainability goals. Thank you once again, dear participants, for being part of this discussion. I look forward to a rich and engaging discussion and conversation ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Agus Tampu Bolon, for your insightful opening remarks for today's webinar. Now we move on to the next agenda, which is the main session of this webinar. the presentation and discussion sessions, and the session will be facilitated by my colleague, Dia Tabina, Southeast Asia Energy Transitions Think Tank Project Lead at the AESR, who will guide us through the discussions. I will now hand over the floor to Tabina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benita, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this regional webinar on Towards the First ASEAN Summit, Philippines Chairship, and the Future of Energy Transition in Southeast Asia. So today's discussion comes at a critical moment for ASEAN as the region navigates geopolitical uncertainty, energy security pressures, and the urgency of accelerating the just energy transition. So, as mentioned before, we're joined here by 4 excellent speakers who will help us unpack regional policy direction, risk, and the concrete opportunities under the Philippines ASEAN Chairship. So each speaker will have 15 minutes, followed by a moderated discussion and audience Q&A. Audience is allowed to post their questions in the chat box during our panelist presentations, and I will read them out later during the Q&A session. We also have an interpreter, so for speakers, please feel free to talk in moderate pace. And also timekeeper is available on screen, so also please mind the duration. Without further ado, we're going to head over to our first speaker, which is Bapak Benny Suryadi, Senior Manager of APAC and Strategic Partnership at the ASEAN Center for Energy. He will talk about ASEAN energy transition landscape and APAC 2026 to 2030. Also, we want to answer what role does APAC 2026 to 2030 play in ensuring that the regional energy transition efforts remain on track despite the current disruptions. So, without further ado, I would welcome Pak Benny. So, Pak Benny, the floor is yours.
And good afternoon. Selamat siang, everyone. Bapak Ibu yang saya hormati. Thank you very much to IESR for inviting the ASEAN Center for Energy to join this important discussion on the Philippine chairship and the future of the energy transition in the Southeast Asia. As mentioned, that I will share the ASEAN's energy transition landscapes and how the APAC, the regional blueprint 2026 and 2030 can help guide the region in navigating the current and future energy challenge. Next slide. So let me start with the regional energy profile. Based on the initial forecast from our team for the upcoming 9th ASEAN's energy outlook, the ASEAN's total final energy consumption in 2026 is estimated around 668 million tons of oil equivalents. This reflects the scale of the ASEAN's energy demand. Our regions continue to grow, driven by industrialization, transport, urbanization, cooling demand, and also digitalization. But the structure of this demand shows a major vulnerability. ASEAN remains highly dependent on oil and gas. The transport sector is the clearest example. 90% of the transport energy consumption is still on oil-based. This means that any disruption in the global oil market can quickly affect fuel price, logistic costs, inflation, and household welfare. The power sector is also exposed with around 31% of generation fuel still dependent on oil and gas. Again, this means global fuel volatility can also affect electricity costs and the power system planning. So ASEAN transition is not only about reducing some emission, but it's also reducing the exposure to the external shock. Next slide, please. So the current Middle East situation give us the concrete example of this vulnerability. ASEAN's continue to rely on the crude oil import, including from the Middle East. Around 55% of the ASEAN crude oil import come from the Middle East. So under the disruption scenario, as you can see shown in this slide, that up to 28% of the ASEAN final consumption could be directly disrupted. This is significant amount for the region. And the impact not only about the physical supply, it's also about affect the fiscal space, subsidies, inflation, market confidence, and of course, social stability. Right? In a crisis, a short-term measure definitely necessary. Government might use subsidies, tax adjustment, price control, demand management, alternative sourcing, then and of course the energy saving campaign. But this measure can only absorb part of the soul. They cannot remove the structural vulnerability. So if ASEANs remain dependent on the imported fossil fuels, the same risk will return whenever there is a geopolitical crisis or market disruption happening again in the future. And therefore, a long-term response must be structural. Electrification, public transport, biofuel, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and definitely a stronger regional cooperation. This is why I would frame the ASEAN's energy transition. I mean, echo what Pak Agus Mubala mentioned earlier, that ASEAN's long-term energy security strategy. Next slide. And in the next slide, that the same issue that I mentioned earlier is also applies in the context of the natural gas, although the scale is very different. Around 70% of the ASEAN's natural gas supply come from the Middle East, translating it to around maybe a bit small disruption in the consumption and the scenario shown in the screens. This may look smaller, the impact on the natural gas compared to the oil, but it remains important because natural gas also play a critical role in ASEAN's power and industrial sectors. The slides also show that how the electricity saving or increasing domestic gas production can help recover some losses. However, as we all know, these are not a complete solution. ASEAN export more natural gas than it consumes, but of course, rerouting export back to the region is not always a simple arrangement. It might be fiscally inefficient or contractually difficult and commercially complicated. So again, the message is clear: ASEAN cannot rely on emergency supply measures. We need a broader diversification. Energy security must now mean more than securing the fuel supply. It must also mean reducing demand vulnerability, improving efficiency, expanding renewables, and strengthen storage. And again, I mentioned earlier, building stronger regional interconnection between the countries in the region. Next slide, please. And this brings us to ASEAN's long-term vision in the new regional blueprint, the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation 2026 to 2030. ASEAN also has a long-term energy vision, a secure, resilient, and interconnected low-carbon and energy futures by 2045. Its word is very important. This secure means ASEAN must provide reliable and affordable energy for the flow. Resilience means our energy system must withstand shock, whether from the geopolitics, climate impacts, or market volatility, or even technology disruption. Meanwhile, interconnected means ASEAN must strengthen regional cooperation, especially through the ASEAN power grids, our cross-border electricity trade. And low carbons mean ASEAN must accelerate decarbonization while recognizing different national circumstances. The APEC for the next 5 years carries the themes advancing regional cooperation in ensuring the energy security and accelerating decarbonization for a just and inclusive energy transition. The first year of the implementation of APEC, this theme is highly relevant today because it does not treat the energy security and decarbonization as a separate agenda. It's bring them together. And then it being translated into 3 major targets that we have: 30% in renewable energy share on total primary energy supply, 45% in the installed power capacity, and also reduce our energy intensity 40% in 2030. Next slide. And furthermore, the direction from this regional blueprint highlight the medium and long-term action on how ASEAN move forward with the energy transition and also to reduce dependence. The slide show that reducing fossil fuels dependence require different action across different time horizon. Some solution can start immediately, like electrification in transport or cooking. The energy efficiency, of course, can also reduce demand. Renewable energy can diversify our power supply, or biofuels can also support the sector where electrification maintains alone. But of course, we also recognize some sectors require more time in investment, such as freight, buses, the domestic shipping, aviation, petrochemicals, and other hard-to-abate sectors. This is why ASEAN, riding the wave, taking advantage. I may say that the crisis that we have today, ASEAN must commit and plan. This result will arrive in states 2030s, 2035, 2040s, and lead to 2045 and beyond. Short-term crisis response is connected for the region, aligned with our regional blueprints. Next will be my last slide, where I would like to emphasize more a bit. Can we have the next slides? I'm talking about the ASEAN's politics. This is the idea being muted 20, 30, 40 years ago. But as we all know today, the ASEAN politics become more and more central to the region. The studies from the ASEAN Center for Energy called the ASEAN Interconnection Master Plan Studies, or AIMS, has identified key cross-border infrastructure projects to enable multilateral power trades under the ASEAN's politics. It is not only seen as a transmission projects, building the infrastructure between one country to other countries, but it's an energy security projects because country can support each other during supply control. It is can also seen as a renewable energy integration project because ASEAN can optimize renewable energy resource across the board. And it also what we call it an investment platform because it creates opportunity for transmission, generation, storage, and system service, and eventually jobs creation and economic growth for the region. We recognize the implementation, the gaps, the challenge. ASEAN needs stronger alignment between what happened in national context, national power development plan, and what we aspire to do at regional context under regional interconnection planning. Of course, we need more to assess wheeling charge, third-party access, grid code, and cross-border power trades. Also, the need to financing mechanism that can do this interconnection projects. All of it is not something that can be done today or in a couple of days, responding to the crisis that we have, but something that ASEAN's commit and put a resource to do that today, tomorrow, and the long runs to enhance our efforts on the energy transition to the region. So to conclude, let me come with the 3 key points. ASEAN, first, the ASEAN energy transition is now inseparable from the energy security. Again, echo what Pak Agus mentioned earlier, the current geopolitical situation, so that fossil fuels dependence create fiscal, economic, and social vulnerability for the region. Second is the short-term emergency measure, definitely necessary, something that we have to bring to the tables now with the current situation, but that's not enough. The ASEAN needs structural solution, something that we are working on the efficiency, electrification, renewable energy, biofuel storage, and everything under the spirits of regional interconnection. Last point, the regional blueprint, the APEX, of course, provide the regional framework to keep ASEAN energy transition on tracks, but continuous inputs, enhancement, and commitment to implement it at regional levels, at the national level, involving all the stakeholders, not only policymakers, not only private sectors, but also CSO and all to be able to contribute so that collectively we could accelerate our effort to achieve a more connected, efficient, and renewable power ASEAN for a secure future of the region. With that, I hope I use my time wisely, but I end my presentation. Maybe to have a follow-up discussion. But thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Pak Beni, for the very insightful presentation. I think you've concluded the presentation nicely with 3 pointers. So the first of all is how the energy transition is not separable with the energy security matters that we're going through right now. And short-term measures are necessary, but it's not enough. We need a structural reform in terms of our energy transition implementations. And as well, the APEC is a regional framework and blueprint, but it also needs constant supervision and also updates in terms of their implementation, not only from policymakers, ASEAN bodies, but also from civil societies as well. So thank you so much for the presentations. I would like to remind our audiences, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box and I will read it out during our Q&A session. Okay. Next, we'll move towards our second speaker, which is Mr. Angelo Kairos de la Cruz, or Kairos, from civil society perspective. So Mr. Kairos is an executive director of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, ICSC, in the Philippines. And the topic that he will present is the expectations on the outcomes of the Philippines ASEAN chairship on the energy sector. So Kairos, please, the floor is yours.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon from Manila here in the Philippines. And as mentioned earlier, I'll be talking about what does it mean for civil society to participate in this space? What does it mean to have civil society in the space? And how the civil society can positively contribute to the high ambition as mentioned by the earlier speaker. How can civil society contribute positively in the high ambition of the ASEAN through the Philippine chairship for this year? Next slide, please. So across Southeast Asia, obviously, there is an urgency to transition in the energy sector as energy demands rises and climate risks intensify and overlap constantly. As a country that has both in terms of climate risk and in terms of energy demand, we do think that the Philippines is a very good space to really start having the hard discussions, the difficult discussions that we should be having in the first place, to identify what does it mean for us to transition towards a sustainable and renewable energy future. ASEAN is at a critical juncture where regional cooperation can determine the pace and success of a sustainable energy future. And with the Philippines taking on the ASEAN chairship, there is a unique opportunity to shape the region's renewable energy agenda and diversify its energy resources at a time when the need for clean, reliable, and affordable energy is a very high time of need. So what does it mean for civil society to have a civil society perspective in the ASEAN? From a civil society perspective, and just to be clear, ICSC is just one of the many civil society organizations and think tanks working with ASEAN and with the ASEAN chairship. So from a civil society perspective, advancing renewable energy is not just a technical or economic issue anymore. It is a matter of equity, accountability, and ensuring that the benefits of the energy transition reach communities on the ground. And this calls for a sustained and holistic engagement, a whole of society approach, if I can put it that way, among local governments, the private sector, civil society, and both state and non-state international actors to effectively accelerate renewable energy development and deployment within the region. To ensure effectivity, a just and inclusive energy transition should be centered. And when I say it should be centered on inclusive energy transition, I specifically mean it should be centered on people. The people who day to day faces the challenges of being energy insecure in terms of limiting their available economic opportunities, better access to education, among many other things. There is a very clear need to ensure that renewable energy expansion does not replicate existing systematic inequalities, for example, of access, land use, and even pricing. In practice, energy access for off-grid and underserved communities should be prioritized. Communities affected by large-scale renewable energy projects are protected, and gender-responsive and indigenous peoples' participation in energy planning should be ensured. By doing so, we can all contribute to a really ambitious impact wherein there's a measurable reduction in energy poverty, especially in rural Southeast Asia, with stronger safeguards for community consent. And we can do this with ASEAN. I mean, for us, the way we see it, anything that the ASEAN says at this point would send a very strong signal, not only to developers, but also to the communities who are waiting for much needed aid and much needed access to clean and better energy. Next slide, please. So for the ASEAN, and as mentioned by the earlier speaker, I mean, it's quite clear that this chairship under the Philippines strongly support the idea of an ASEAN power grid and how it can be implemented later on. While you know we know for a fact that the ASEAN power grid has been a long-standing program of the ASEAN, the Philippine chairship already includes energy resilience as one of its priorities. And this means that distributed flexible energy will be promoted by this chairship. This is particularly timely given the current energy crisis, along and as well as the regions to make sure that we keep track to the ASEAN's target of 45% RE target by 2030. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I've mentioned, there's already a very strong support on what does it mean to have a ASEAN power grid. Unfortunately, the ASEAN power grid, the idea behind it, the wording even, it can easily confuse people. It can mean many other things. If you haven't read the APAIC report, for example, if you haven't been engaging with ACE, it can mean so many things. So as I've said before, and I would like to reiterate it again, this chairship would definitely support the idea of an ASEAN power grid with strong focus on distributed flexible energy as well. But at the same time, this chairship, we think, is a very good example, a very good landing spot to start the discussions on critical minerals, which would be included in the agenda while highly likely being, one of the hardest spaces to have a conversation with, while even being considered as a taboo for the past years, given the inherent sensitivity of critical minerals with member states. However, critical minerals would be a part of it because it's required for RE tech, it's required for batteries, it's required for EVs and other related manufacturing value chains. ASEAN member states are seeking to position themselves more strategically with regional and global green value chains. And the Philippines would be, I think, in a very good position to chair those discussions, particularly, for example, in attracting RE100 companies that have net zero commitments in their respective countries. So how can the ASEAN as a region play a bigger role in terms of participating in the global supply chain while also developing its own industries and its own supply chain within its jurisdiction? Yeah. Next slide, please. And all of the ambition that have been said and that have been set as well are being done in the context of the global energy crisis where we are right now. I think you're quite aware, this is happening everywhere, but the Philippines was one of the first, if not the first country to declare a national energy emergency. Being a market-driven and a price taker, the Philippines has really high vulnerability when it comes to global shocks, such as the US and Israel war on Iran. So for the Philippines, how to navigate the energy crisis without compromising the ambition that we already set in terms of RE targets, in terms of transitioning out of fossil and going to cleaner and sustainable energy, that's a very big issue. The influx of protectionist narrative that we should start getting more share of the fossil fuel supply chain and so on, I think it can create a negative backsliding if we are not careful. So for example, what we're proposing through the chairship as well, through the many discussions that we're having with the Philippine chairship, is that first, we should have clear guardrails for fossil fuel. We do recognize that there is a role to play, but that use has to be time-bound, that use has to be considered short-term, and the transitioning out of that fossil fuel use should not be undermined in any way, despite having to navigate the problems currently presented by the energy crisis. The Philippine chairship has pivoted its strategy towards energy resilience and energy security in order to strengthen its regional energy sufficiency. This may include development of its regional energy supply chain, allowing itself to become less reliant on imported fossil fuels that are susceptible to global price volatility and geopolitical conflict. However, as I've mentioned, there may also be a tendency for the region to rely on legacy conventional power, more specifically on coal and natural gas that are indigenous and also abundant in the region. The chairship should be able to show local experience of island communities with a balanced energy mix that has proven to improve the reliability, affordability, and security of their respective energy transitions, energy systems once they take on their own energy transition journey as well. While obviously this may take time and this may take a lot of policy and safeguards, but I think we are getting there. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I've mentioned before, the energy crisis can create a backslide. What we should do is make sure that we protect clean energy momentum. We should make sure that all fossil fuel driven interventions are short-term and have enough safeguards. We should reiterate over and over again whenever and wherever possible that we should make renewables as the default solution. And we can do that by doing policy integration across the board, making sure that permitting processes are more effective, making sure that trade is friendlier within the region. We share stories of success. We share challenges as well, so that we can navigate this problem with in not in any way our doing, so that we can navigate these problems together as well. Next slide, please. So a just and democratic energy transition, as I've mentioned earlier, should have bits and pieces of work that have been done already by civil society and other think tanks as well. Priorities should always fall on inclusive and affordable energy access. We should make sure that advances are made on distributed energy solutions. We should be able to call for a regional green and financing mechanism, particularly in de-risking investments. The Philippines has some really good examples in terms of allowing foreign ownership on RE, fast-tracking permitting processes, especially large-scale projects such as offshore wind. We should make sure that links, energy transition with climate action and biodiversity protection. We should not forget that the ASEAN is the hotspot of many biodiversity areas, which potentially can come in direct clash with RE development. And the earlier we talk about this, the earlier we address the problem, the solutions won't have to come at a price of stalling the energy transition. We should also support the growth of green jobs and workforce training. We can do this with a lot of cross-border pollination of ideas and approaches on how countries are already doing this. And lastly, we should promote a regional green supply chain for renewables. As a prize-taking country, I think it's high time for the Philippines and as well as for many ASEAN members to find their spot, to find their space in the global supply chain for renewables, to make it more attractive, but at the same time to make sure that it has more economic sense for the countries to participate in this transition as well. Next slide, please. And as I've mentioned, some parts of that in terms of safeguards is protecting biodiversity and communities. We should avoid green grabbing and environmental harm. We should introduce stronger safeguards, making sure that you have transparent multi-stakeholder environmental impact assessments, ASEAN-wide accountability in terms of regional environmental and social safeguard standards, and faster and accountable transition with clear coal phase down plus renewable energy scale-up targets to support the 45% target by 2030. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is my last slide because, this is a bit biased coming from ICSC, but I think civil society, if civil society priorities are effectively integrated, ASEAN could move forward toward the renewable energy transition that is not only faster, but also fairer, more transparent, and more socially legitimate across Southeast Asia. Civil society has a role to play. I can't say that everyone already has found that role in particular, but as we go along, beyond the chairship of the Philippines, as we transition to Singapore, I think it's critical to make sure that the community of practice of civil society engaging in the energy transition through the ASEAN is sustained, if not even strengthened later on. Again, I'm Carlos de la Cruz from the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Kairos, for the presentation. Again, I would like to conclude your presentations by emphasizing the importance of civil societies and their involvement in terms of the implementation of energy transition and also policy decisions. Not only that, we also want to have a clear guard rails for fossil fuels, as mentioned, because as for right now, Philippines is one of the first nations that announced their national energy emergency. So we know that there's a high dependence on fossil fuels, and we need to start reducing our dependence on it. By putting time constraints in fossil fuels use and also making renewable energy the default solution, as you said. Other than that, we also need to make it just and also inclusive by keeping environmental and biodiversity impact in mind as well. And not only that, we also want to keep pushing workforce development, clean technology supply chain, and also democratize the energy governance. So yeah, I think that's thank you so much for the very insightful presentation. Again, I would like to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box, and I would ask them in the Q&A session. Before we move forward to our third speaker, I would like to remind everyone to fill in the feedback form with the QR that will be displayed on screen. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Okay, now we will move forward to our third speaker. I would like to welcome Mr. Indra Overland, or Indra. Indra is a research professor and head of the Center for Energy Research at the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs. The topic would be mitigating future crises through accelerated renewables, especially for the Southeast Asia region. So, Indra, please feel free. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Right, I'm waiting for my presentation to come up. There we go. Thank you. So the question, next slide, please. Kind of an overhanging question in the current situation is whether the conflict in the Gulf, connected with Iran, the US, and Israel, can be Asia's Ukraine moment. So I'd like to draw some lines from what's going on now to Ukraine and how that has worked out in Europe. Europe had been becoming increasingly dependent upon oil and gas from Russia since the 1960s, so from deep into the Soviet period, and the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine came as a shock to Europe, also an energy shock. And I think that the Asian countries, including ASEAN countries, can learn some things from Europe's experience in dealing with this shock, both from its successes and from its weaknesses and failures, and probably above all from its weaknesses and failures. So the successes are that Europe had been scaling up renewable energy quite substantially before 2022. And all of those investments have been highly beneficial for Europe after 2022, after it lost access to Russian oil and gas. So it was very good for Europe to have done that. And after 2022, the savings estimated for 2026 only from previous investments in renewable energy, only in natural gas, have been estimated at 67 billion for Europe. So past investments are really paying off, and a lot of those projects look a lot more profitable now than they did when they were done. And after 2022, Europe further accelerated its investments in renewable energy, further protecting it against future crises, including the current crisis of Hormuz. So those are the successes that it's possible to take inspiration from. But unfortunately, there are also many failures in Europe. Firstly, the Russian aggression towards Ukraine didn't start in 2022. It started in 2014 with blatant breaches of agreements with Western countries and with Ukraine, and annexing of Crimea and Donbass and so on. And at the time, after 2014, Europe did nothing. Europe did nothing substantial. It didn't react to this. It was very slow, and it didn't understand that this was a pattern of instability, which was to continue. So there's an error to learn from. And another weakness is that although investments in renewable energy Europe increased after 2022, they didn't increase as much as they could do. There was a lot of support for fossil fuels, for cushioning price shock, and there was a shift from Russian natural gas and oil to American natural gas and oil. And what we've seen in the last a bit more than a year of the second Trump administration is that America is also a kind of a petrostate. It's also relatively unstable, and it's also quite threatening to Europe. So Europe shifted from one source of unreliable fossil fuels to another source of unreliable fossil fuels, which now looks increasingly like a bad idea, as the US is increasingly aligned with Russia against Europe. So the lesson here is that Europe worried too much, much too much about the short-term costs of ramping up renewable energy. It wasted way too much on supporting and cushioning the energy shock by supporting purchases of fossil fuels, and it underestimated the long-term costs of remaining dependent on fossil fuels from a variety of sources. So many takeaways here. Next slide, please. As Fatih Birol, the director of the International Energy Agency, has said, the vase is broken. We now can see that the vase is broken. And what this means is that the fossil fuel energy system, I mean the oil and gas-based energy system, is broken in a way that it is not possible to put it back together again. These are irreversible problems, although they're not new problems, but they've come to a new level. The current crisis is worse than the crises of 1973 and 79, which are very famous and thought to be very severe. This is worse, among other reasons, because there is both Ukraine and Hormuz, and both affect everybody. To many countries in Asia, Ukraine seems far away, but as a matter of fact, the current crisis related to Hormuz is greatly exacerbated by Ukraine because Russian oil and gas supply many of the same markets, and these are global markets for LNG and for oil. And it may not be possible to fix this vase at all, or perhaps you can patch it together, but it'll never be the same, and it'll never be as good as before. Next slide, please. So what is ASEAN doing? Well, one thing it's got, which was passed late last year, but I don't think has come into effect yet, is the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Petroleum Security, which replaces APSA. So the problem with this is it's only about helping out with replacing 10% of lost energy supplies. And it's supposed to be, when one of the ASEAN countries loses 10% of its energy supplies due to such a crisis as we have currently in Hormuz, the other's also likely to lose them. So it's going to be very testing for solidarity. It's also to be subject, such support is to be subject to conditions to be negotiated on a voluntary and commercial basis. So if it's done on a commercial basis, what's the point of it? Why not just buy it on the open market? So it seems largely symbolic, and it also has the problem that it tries to solve the problem within the fossil fuel, oil and gas paradigm. Next slide, please. So what could ASEAN do instead? As long as ASEAN or other countries, such as Europe, can constrain their responses to the fossil fuel paradigm, they're going to be stuck with the same risks. So one of the measures that has been called for is for ASEAN countries to find and develop more oil and gas resources of their own. If ASEAN is able to find sufficient oil and gas resources for sufficiently long, i.e. for many decades, to completely remove its dependence on external oil and gas resources, that might work, disregarding the climate effects of it and other negative effects of it. However, that is extremely unlikely because ASEAN oil and gas production is generally and has been for some time declining relative to their own consumption. So what looking for more oil and gas will do is it will actually help maintain dependency on external oil and gas, because you'll never manage to replace it entirely realistically. Cooperating on renewable energy will be cheaper and safer. In last year, Michael Jacob, a German researcher, and I published an article in a journal called Climate Action, where we estimated that the ASEAN countries could save $140 billion by 2030 by fulfilling their Paris Agreement targets. And that was published last year, which is before the current crisis. So now the savings would be significantly greater. So it's a better response than trying to cooperate more intensively on oil and gas, is to try to incorporate more intensively on renewables. One thing that ASEAN is working on is the ASEAN power grid, which is a good thing and which can help support rollout of intermittent renewable energy. However, I wonder whether it's getting too much focus because there are a number of limitations with it too. And I wonder if it's getting too much focus too soon, because before you do an ASEAN power grid, it would be necessary to remove subsidies for fossil fuels, both as a premise for, or as a basis for the ASEAN power grid, and because subsidizing fossil fuels, especially when they are cheap, is very detrimental for energy security, because it encourages the population and the economy to use more fossil fuels than they otherwise would have. So it encourages dependency, and it exacerbates vulnerability to the kind of crisis we're currently having. Not a good idea. So it is important to remove these fossil fuel subsidies when prices are low, to avoid this type of, or to soften this kind of crisis in the future. Another area which I haven't seen any discussion of is whether the ASEAN countries could cooperate on purchases of renewable energy. If they could get together and have very large auctions, they could drive down the prices that they have to pay, mostly to China, to get solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and so on. And in the past, when countries have managed to reduce the cost of renewable energy, it has often been through very large scale purchases, as for example, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates have done. Next slide, please. What we see is that renewable energy sales are already dramatically rising. So if you look at the graph here on the slide, and look at the oval red circle, you see the jump in March this year. So just after the Hormuz crisis started, solar panel exports from China almost doubled in 1 month. It's an incredibly dramatic development. And this shows that the world is investing more in renewable energy in response to the crisis. But one should be careful with wishful thinking. Of course, this must to some extent also be a coincidence, a very important coincidence, but still a coincidence. It can't all just be a reaction to the Hormuz crisis, because the world can't react that fast. On the other hand, it can be very positive in that it can support a self-reinforcing narrative of switching to renewables. Look, people are doing it. Let's do it. Let's move forward, and so on. So I look optimistically at the future in light of this. Next slide, please. Some people worry that shifting from importing fossil fuels to shifting to renewable energies just changes one dependence with another dependence. So instead of buying oil and gas, you buy solar panels and batteries and so on. And it is true that there are new dependencies involved in this shift, but the dependencies are fundamentally different. And it is a question of this very important concept, which we all need to be aware of and internalize, which is the difference between flows and stocks. When you're dependent upon oil and gas, you need to continuously import new oil and gas. Because like the human body needs water or food, you need to have it all the time. If not, you can't continue your operation. So it is a true addiction. Being dependent upon importing equipment for new renewable energy is a different kind of dependence, because it doesn't, you don't depend upon further imports to continue operating. The solar panels you've already imported, you can continue using freely. So the dependence here is not for your operation, for the continuation of your operation, it is for the expansion of your operation. So it's a very, very different thing, a very, very different dependency, and it is much less dangerous. But of course, in this dependency, there is also a geopolitical aspect, and that is that it strengthens China. And that is because China has done many wise things, and the rest of us in ASEAN and in Europe need to catch up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indra, for the presentations. It's very insightful, especially in perspective of the global wider dynamics, right? So I kind of want to conclude it a bit more on your presentation. So I think for the EU, if we look at the 2022 crisis regarding with the Russian and Ukraine conflict, they already have a lot of renewables in place, and it makes the region more resilient to that external shocks. But the 2022 incident is not actually the first time that they face similar shocks like this. They have the 2014, which at that time the electrifications or renewable energy deployment is not yet the main focus. They still focus on shifting fossil fuels supply from Russia now to like the US. And as ASEAN, what ASEAN could learn from that is basically we need to be better prepared, because this kind of geopolitical shocks is a pattern. It's not something that will just happen now. It might happen again in the futures. And by that time, we need to be more resilient, and we need to learn from basically the mistakes, quote unquote, that we have right now. So we need to focus more on, again, reducing reliance on fossil fuels by like a lot of measures like removing subsidies, and also viewing renewable energy as a safer bet that is more effective and also could save a lot more money. And also more regional collaboration, not only in terms of the grid in APG, but also in joint purchases of renewable energy. And we could also look to the other big global countries like China that is now heavily exporting renewable energy. So this renewable energy is not only a matter of security, but also economic growth and impact. So thank you so much, Indra, for the presentation. Looking forward to our discussion later in the Q&A session. Everyone, please, if you have any questions for Indra or for any of our speakers, feel free to put it in the chat box. Okay. So moving forward to our last speaker, last but certainly not least, I would like to welcome Bapak Arif Rosadi, our Diplomacy and Global Affairs Manager at IESR, who will introduce the Southeast Asia Energy Transformation Initiatives, how it also could be a practical actions for ASEAN energy agendas. So, Pak Arif, the floor is yours.
Bina, and good afternoon, Pak Beni, Kairos, Prof. Indra, and all participants. And I think all the previous speaker already covered the important things need to be addressed. So I will try not to repeat what other speaker already said, but I will try to reflect, to contemplate the future of our regional energy transition and exploring the idea how we can move forward. Next slide, please. In the very beginning, I would like to emphasize that the current energy crisis exposed our Southeast Asia region vulnerability due to our fossil fuel dependency. And this energy crisis is strong reason why we should move accelerated to renewable energy as soon as possible as our energy system backbone and as the anchor. We understand that in this crisis, Southeast Asia government try their best to achieve energy security, and in the short-term effort, we observe several actions have been taken. The first is demand management. We see some countries like Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam issue the policy on the working from home with the various implementation. And the other thing is the country like Malaysia addressing the alternating driving staying. And the second is about the fiscal intervention. And the third is various supply diversification. And in Vietnam, we also see there is procuring 4 million barrel from non-Middle East sources. And in the Thailand, the country banned oil export except to Cambodia and Laos, and Indonesia. The country tried to accelerate the use of B50 biodiesel. And the fourth is there is also a paradoxical call. A country like Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines reactivated and maximized coal-fired generation precisely as well as the three were promoting energy transition roadmap. And in the Vietnam, record achieved 65 million tons import in 2025. In short term, it could see as the viable option at this time, but the next action should move from fossil fuel and favor to renewable energy because we see despite the Southeast Asia government try to diversify and manage the current source of fossil fuel from Middle East to non-Middle East, it won't solve the problem because the first is fossil fuel very limited source, and the second is there is risk of occurs geopolitical disruption from non-Middle East in the future, like from Russia. So, in short, accelerating renewable energy is not a pressure, but reasonable option for this region to achieve energy security and cut off dependency from the other countries' limited source. This is possible because, in our perspective, in the political perspective, our region has good political modalities. Almost all Southeast Asia country is signatory of a Paris Agreement, and our regional organization, ASEAN, has collective regional renewable energy target by 2030 that reflected in the new APAEC as Pak Beni and Kairos mentioned earlier in their presentation. And I would like give a great appreciation to Pak Beni and ASEAN Center for Energy team because the energy sector is the most advanced in the ASEAN process when it comes to the effort of emission reduction. And as far as I know, this is the only sector has a collective target that contribute to emission reduction in the region. However, we also should note that the effort to achieve this target must be accelerated and if possible could align with the global stocktake call to tripling renewable energy by 2030. And of course, there is question why the gap is remain persist, and the answer is the region is still a fast the five structural barrier like a young coal fleet and lock in. There is 121 gigawatt capacity with average age 12 years. long-term power purchase agreement, and also price cap make coal artificially competitive. And the second is the challenge is grid inadequacy, and there is limited ASEAN power grid link, also fragmented national grid, curtailment problem, and also the need of investment around 764 billion investment by 2045. And in terms of regulatory fragmentation, it includes non-cost reflective tariff, limited unbundling, and also non-competitive wholesale market, and also no regional regulator. And then the fourth is about the fossil fuel fiscal dependency that cover coal royalties underpins the budget. In Indonesia context, Indonesia subsidy bill based on 70 dollar barrel assumption. And the last is combating development priority like nickel processing powered by a captive coal in Indonesia context. Next, please. And in terms of scientific robust and evident, there are a lot of studies that examine our regional energy transition future. Of course, from a risk perspective, some studies said that fossil fuel dependency risking energy security and hamper economic development. And the study also demonstrates a specific number, like estimate the stranded asset could rise to 100 until 123 billion and half the life of coal-fired power plant. And from the benefit perspective, IRENA studies state that energy transition will benefit the region social economically, like generate about 13.1 trillion GDP in the region by 2050, or 3.5% higher compared to business usual, also creating 6 million green job related to renewable energy by 2030. So the next question is why there is still a challenge to move the needle. Of course, the one of the reason is the 5 structural barrier that I mentioned earlier, but we also see another barrier as well as opportunity. In terms of the ASEAN process, we see that we have a comprehensive regional process infrastructure. In the energy sector, as Pabeni mentioned earlier, we have APAEC, and we have existing knowledge like ASEAN Energy Outlook. And in other sectoral, there is like ASEAN Strategy for Carbon Neutrality, ASEAN Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance, and ASEAN Mineral Cooperation, and ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change Action Plan. So by looking at this policy infrastructure, we see it is possible to materialize the potential economic benefit into concrete deliverable. However, the region need to improve its internal coordination, and also the important thing is increasing the discussion on the practical aspect that need pushed by high level position. So in that regard, as Pak Agus mentioned earlier in his welcome remark, ESR with Southeast Asia Energy Transition Think Tank Collaborative Network, or SETI, including with ICSC, propose what we call as Southeast Asia Energy Transformative Agenda, or CIAT. This initiative is not trying to replace the existing regional framework, but as complementary strategic framework to accelerate decarbonization on the energy sector. Next slide, please. Yeah, this initiative has a 4 pillar. The first is accelerating clean energy deployment. And when it comes to the practical idea, there are some recommendations like establishing ASEAN JETP to unlock financing to meet 130 billion annual by 2030, also proposing fast track on the ASEAN power grid, and also scale up investment in solar, wind, green hydrogen, and battery storage to enhance energy security and creating new economic opportunities. And the second is building ASEAN as clean energy manufacturing and trade hub. The practical idea that we can propose in the second pillar is like launch ASEAN clean energy industrial strategy, also establish regional value chain for critical mineral processing to ensure the region control key resource for global clean tech industry. And the third is optimizing ASEAN plus 3 partnership to facilitate advanced technology transfer and also industrial collaboration. When it comes to the third pillar, strengthening green investment and financing mechanism, we also propose expanding the ASEAN green taxonomy to attract more global institutional investor and also green bond, as well as mobilize public-private partnership to accelerate the deployment low carbon industry and energy efficient solution. And last is enhancing policy coordination and workforce development. Some of a practical idea is launch ASEAN Clean Workforce Initiative and establish ASEAN Clean Energy Research and Development. So this initiative could see as the list of recommendation or menu for the ASEAN as the outcome, because we understand that ASEAN has rotary system on its chairmanship, and each chairship has different priorities and interests. So we expect each year every chairship will choose one of the practical as the outcome from our initiative that we propose. And if every chairship choose different option from the SEATI, if that happen, we can make sure we are on the right pathway toward achieving energy transition. I will stop here and give the floor back to moderator Tabina. Thank you.
Thank you, Masaros, for the presentation. So I think the main background of the CIT is basically what the other three speakers has talked about in deep, basically in securing, enhancing the energy security and resilience of the region. But again, with the good with the targets and the commitment that is already been proposed, and also within the framework of APAEC, there's still gap in terms of the implementations, and also the deployment of that set target. So there's a gap in the existing conditions with the ideal condition. With ISR has identified 5 structural barriers that you said about coal lock-in, grid inadequacies, regulations, fragmentation, fossil fuel physical dependence, and also competing development. So the CIT agenda, as you said, is not a agenda that replace the current ASEAN agenda, but it complements the current ASEAN agenda with the 4 pillars. So this is an agenda with a list of initiatives that could be chosen as a priorities for each of the ASEAN chairship. So what we want is basically each ASEAN member state, when they were in the chairship, could choose or prioritize 1 or 2 of these initiatives. And if everyone chose set a different initiative that we could basically work on together with different focus, but also still in collaborative effort. So I think that's the main thing about the CIT agenda. Okay, that would be the end of the presentation. After this, we'll move forward to the Q&A session. So please, everyone, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box. Before we move forward, I would also like to remind everyone to fill in the feedback form. So we will again show the QR on screen. The presentation materials as well. Okay, So I think now we can move towards the discussion and audience Q&A. In the chat box, I believe there's already a couple of questions here. So I think this one is from Marwa and from UGM. This question is directed to Kairos. So they said, I wonder if there is a concrete example on how civil society are facilitated in the energy transition process. I am particularly concerned looking at how energy transition in some cases led to further exclusions and injustice, especially in large infrastructure projects. I think you already mentioned it as well, Kairos, about just and inclusivity. And we know in terms of renewable energy, especially like mega projects, it could it could have maybe a social impact as well that could be a trade-offs of these renewable energy projects or deployments. So maybe for Kairos, you could answer that first question.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I think, I mean, first of all, I think the concern is really valid. It's we've been seeing a lot of projects and programs being pushed by the supply side, and it's almost as if there's no other choice but to say yes, even if it's detrimental to the community's welfare, to their economic activities, and so on. So the concern is really valid, and it's happening, and we should be on the lookout for that. In terms of actual examples, I can share two things that ICSC has been experimenting on for the past few years. And first is that as a policy think tank, one of our realizations is that sometimes the lever for policy change is not really the number of research papers that we are able to bring out. It's not really on the data science simulations that we are able to show, but it's on actual examples, on pilot projects wherein policymakers and local executives are able to see how renewable energy, and for our case, how solar can actually support their transition, can make them resilient, more resilient as a local government. And we do have two projects on that. And these are both based in Eastern Visayas, which is the eastern seaboard side of the Philippines. It's the gateway of the strongest typhoons that we usually get throughout the year. And what we did is it's actually quite simple. We solarized the municipal halls of two local governments for them to see how first renewable energy, how a solar rooftop can decrease their monthly operating costs. But at the same time, how can renewable energy provide that needed value of resilient and energy secured future for them. So throughout the past year and a half of implementation, we've logged a lot of savings, but at the same time, there's a critical behavioral shift among these local governments. Now they're looking at engaging on how they can use their existing funds to replicate and scale up the installation, how they can use their existing funds for missionary areas like last mile and off-grid areas to make sure that they're able to transition towards renewable energy, solar in particular, because it's the cheapest, and in terms of scale, it's the one that fits the profile of these local governments. So it's really civil society organization, a small civil society organization, sort of starting the change. And from that, we are now seeing a lot of institutional and policy changes within these local governments right now. And that's my second example is related to that, which is civil society organizations and think tanks, those who have the space and those who have the expertise to actually lead the process on nationally mandated policies. So for us, it's the renewable energy roadmap for local governments. So we're assisting, I think, 10 provinces and 20 municipalities for them to come up with their renewable energy roadmaps. And that includes not only, an inclusion of data-backed narrative on where they are right now, but also in co-creating future scenarios for them wherein renewable energy is taking the lead in terms of their energy share. So the space is there. I don't think it's we can say that in ASEAN, it's the same space is available across all civil society organizations. But I think this example, together with other examples across across the countries, should be able to inspire more similar actions. Should be able to show us that it's possible. To be able to show us that we can do so much more, regardless of our size and regardless of the space that are given to us. And I'll stop there for now. And thank you again for that really good question.
Yes, thank you so much, Kairos, for answering that. I think it's very interesting how, yeah, we as an organization, not only civil society, but I believe also in ACE and NUPI, that we focus on the technical side. And I think one of the most important part is basically communicating that and proving it to the public. So as you said, I think the most, when you said the most important part is pilot projects, showing real examples how renewable energy could better affect the livelihood of certain communities or certain local governments. That's when people start shift their thought about renewable energy, shifting it from maybe a burden to economic opportunities as well. So I think that's very interesting. Okay, thank you, Kairos, for the answer again. Next question, this is for Pak Benny. If I may ask, so there's two questions actually in this from Albin Purba. They were wondering if you could share some more information on the current progress and the next steps for BIMP-PIP, which is the Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines Power Integration Project, and APGF, the ASEAN Power Grid Financing Facilities. That's the first question. The second one, what is the progress of the enhanced APSA ratification, or is there effort to promote operationalization of the CERM? So, Pak Benny, you could answer those two questions.
Right. Thank you. Terima kasih Pak Alvin Purba. That's a bit two questions, but let me respond in three parts, Pak. First on the BIMP, AGA, and ASEAN Power Grid, and then APG financing facility, and the last one on APSA and CERM. On the IMP, I'm happy to share with everyone that ACE is about to start the collaboration with the BNP AGA Facilitation Center, the energy cluster. So in cooperation with the ADB, ASEAN Development Bank, we're going to develop a sub-regional power interconnection master plan. So this work will focus on optimum design of regional grids interconnection, emanating from the integrated Borneo power system, so covering the BIMP sub-region and its potential connection with the wider ASEAN power system. This is important because BIMP has a strategic role in the future of the ASEAN. So the sub-region has a strong renewable energy potential, this hydropower, solar, and other clean energy resource. At the same time, it has growing demand center, industrial development opportunity, and also a strategic geographic linking between the island and the mainland ASEAN system. So the idea that we are currently working with the BIMP is not only to identify transmission line, but it's also to ensure that the sub-regional planning in these four countries is well aligned with the broader APG framework. And at projects level, ACE is also commencing the feasibility studies cross-border interconnection between Philippines, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, or Indonesia, Malaysia. So and then at the same time, we're also exploring connection between Sarawak and Peninsula Malaysia. So this study is very important because it helps to move the discussion. I mean, we've been discussed for many years, but needs to really move this into a concrete projects preparation. Which lead to my second answer on the APG financing facilities. If everyone is following the news that it's been launched at the ministerial meeting last year, and ACE working with the World Bank, ASEAN Development Bank, and ASEAN Secretariat. So the four of us is called the APG working groups. the Avenger of the LPG, where we work to identify the key interconnection project that can further develop with the financing support from the ADB, with the World Bank, or as well as the others global finance. This is very important because the interconnection projects are very, very complex. They involve multiple jurisdiction, utilities, regulator, technical standards. I think there's a lot of it. Risk sharing mechanism is also involved, right? So the APGF is not about only mobilizing the money. It's not only showing me the monies, but it's also helping the projects become more bankable. So supporting from the preparation, feasibility study, technical assessment, legal, etc., that needs to be put in place. Last point on the APSA and CERN. So 2 days ago, on Monday, the 11 ASEAN minister on energy from all of the 11 ASEAN member states attended the special what we call it special minister meeting chaired by Secretary Guardian from the Philippines. So the minister underscored the importance of the APSA, or the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Petroleum Security. Dr. Indra mentioned a bit earlier, as a key regional mechanism to strengthen preparedness and collective response to potential oil and gas supply. So currently in ratification process by each of ASEAN member states, undertaking its domestic process to fulfill the entry into force. I know we are in the middle of the crisis. Means that everything needs to be speed up, but as we all know as well, in this ratification process goes to the parliament, approved countries are also, it's not a secret, it also takes time to progress. But at the meantime, as we are the APSA Secretariat, we are also working to finalize the operationalization of the coordinated emergency response mechanism, or they call it SEM. So once it's in place, it will have to mobilize regional effort or global effort to support individual ASEAN member states in responding to challenging energy security situation that we have. So I hope I respond to that very Elvin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Beni, for the very comprehensive answer. So hopefully that answer your question as well, Pak Elvin. Okay, so the next one, I think I'm going just to move towards these questions, and maybe because we have a lot of questions now in the chat box, so I will try to moderate maybe several questions into just one question for the speakers to answer. So this is from Dina. She asked about which countries are the international partners, state or non-state, that the speaker saw has been or was very helpful in accelerating energy transition in 11 ASEAN member states. How did they accelerate the transition? Please specify. So maybe we could go from Kairos first in terms of the Philippines, which countries are the most helpful in accelerating energy transition in the Philippines, and then from Indonesia, Pak Beni and Mas Arif could jump in as well. Indra could also answer about, in terms of the global perspective, who has been the countries that help the region the most, I think. So maybe Kairos could go first for this.
Thank you for that. I mean, for us in the Philippines, I don't think we can say select one particular country or a select group of countries for these questions. As I've mentioned, I mean, what the Philippines did is we opened up our renewable energy market to 100% foreign ownership to break away from the very ruthless cycle wherein you have the same players, those who have made money and have been making money on fossil fuel investments, being a required part of any joint venture on renewable energy. So what the country did is, we opened up the market, and now we've seen an influx, particularly in our renewable energy zones that have been identified by the Department of Energy together with its partners where investments could be made. So for example, it's really very tech specific. So for example, for offshore wind, we know that the Europe-based companies, Nordic companies are the ones who are leading that because they do have experience in massive offshore wind investments. When it comes to solar and battery, needless to say, China have been the top supplier here in the Philippines. But surprisingly, in the past 2 years, we're seeing an influx as well of Vietnamese EVs, Vietnam-based electric vehicles here in the Philippines that I think have been providing a critical support to the transportation gap, particularly after the energy crisis. So I think in general, it's a matter of aligning national policies to open up its door to allow various countries to come in because the demand is there. But then now we're dictating the terms of where investments can be made, how it should be made, who should be talked to before the investment is actually deployed. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Cairo. So I think in terms of the Philippine context, Philippines is very open to allowing various countries in terms of investing in renewables energy because the demand is there. Like you said, in Nordic countries, that is more advanced in terms of like wind, China for solar, and Vietnam as well in the region for EVs. Okay. For the case of Indonesia, maybe Mas Arif or Pak Benny could help answer this question. Maybe Mas Arif first.
Indonesia context, it is hard for me to identify the most country that contribute in Indonesia energy transition because if we look at to the several project, we can identify several aspects like the capacity building. When it comes to the capacity building, we have a good relationship with Germany. They provide a lot of technical assistances for energy transition in Indonesia. Also, they also have a project clean, affordable, secure energy cash that cover some of Southeast Asia country, including Indonesia, Philippines, and also Vietnam. And also when it comes to the British or UK, they also provide the project that they call as green energy transition in Indonesia that focus on green hydrogen and development. And we also identified some kind of the project like from the United States before Trump administration, like Mentari, if I'm not mistaken, as well as Sinar project. And when it comes to the real project in the field, we also see that some of country like United Emirates Arab, they provide assistances and also investment in developing of Cirata solar PV floating. And in terms of the implementation, China Power as one of engineering, procurement, and construction company also support in development. So I think to answer to Ibu Dina question, it cannot answer only by question because each country in Indonesia have a different contribution for Indonesia energy transition until now. Yeah. But
Yes. Thank you so much, Masaros. I think it's also similar to the Philippines that a lot of nations and international partners has support Indonesia in terms of their renewable energy development. Maybe from Pak Benny's side in ACE, do you have any more insights on this, Pak?
Very much. I think the first principle that's going to be, in the context of ASEAN, everyone has a different level of the economic development, but it's also a different level of the energy development, which makes some countries advanced in other countries in one. We know that Singapore is quite advanced in energy efficiency, and that is being translated to support the other country in the region is also to move in to that direction. But beyond, and then few countries like Vietnam, Malaysia is also, including Philippines, is quite advanced in renewable energy. There's also translated into a cooperation at the regional level that how so not only Vietnam is progressing, or Malaysia is progressing, but it's also the rest of the ASEAN country is also advancing on the regional renewable energy cooperation. And beyond ASEAN, ASEAN itself has a number of the dialogue partners, and then each of the dialogue partner has its own strengths. So we mentioned that how Germany with its experience and strong knowledge and technology and renewable energy integration as well. For example, how China or how Japan's, which is a leading engagement in ASEAN in terms of the energy efficiency development that benefiting the region in advancing our work on the energy transition. So I don't have a single answer that but then that's also the role that we're doing at the ASEAN Center for Energy, that how to orchestrate the support from all the partners, because at the end of the day we realize this is not something that ASEANs can achieve by our own effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Babini, for the answer. So I think I would like to give the floor to Indra. Maybe this question would be in terms of the global perspective, which region or which countries or partners do you see is the most maybe invested or the most supportive or helpful in terms of supporting the region's energy transition efforts? Maybe you could give an insight for us.
That's a very interesting and slightly tricky question to answer. Because I think maybe one of the issues in ASEAN is that there haven't been very many positive influences from the outside. Many countries, external actors have not played such a positive role. If I start with China, in the past, China remained involved in the coal sector here for quite a long time. I'm not quite sure how big that involvement is now. It seems to have gone down a lot. And I think China might be one of the countries playing the biggest positive role now, and certainly has a very big potential for the future because it can supply very cheap equipment. But in the past, not so great. Japan has actually played a surprisingly negative role. So Japan is a global renewable energy laggard. There are many actors in Japan which are highly negative towards renewable energy. And it's some kind of strange masochism where one of the most import-dependent countries in the world of fossil fuels insists on continuing with fossil fuels, or alternatively maybe nuclear energy, but not renewables. And Japan is very much respected and admired in Southeast Asia, so this negative influence has been very great, unfortunately. Another country that's very close to ASEAN is Australia. And Australia is another very fossil fuel oriented country. So it dabbles in renewables here too, but over time, also due to shifting governments inside Australia, hasn't had a stable, strong, positive input. And the US obviously is not very constructive. It was in the JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, but withdrew abruptly. And Trump also wanting to withdraw from Paris Agreement and so on has inspired Prabhu and others here to think that maybe they should also withdraw. So not very positive. And in general, most Western countries here, some of their biggest engagements are in the oil and gas sector in these countries, if you look at what the Western oil majors are doing. A country that has paid, maybe I would say is number one, is Germany. Germany through GIZ, the German aid organization, has been trying consistently and on quite a large scale to help out. That also brings me on to maybe last point here, which is the JETPs, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, which Vietnam and Indonesia have, which I think there's also something interesting to say, which is very much an attempt from some outside countries, coalitions of the willing, to try to support energy transition in ASEAN, and specifically phasing out of coal and phasing in renewables. And they are, I mean, the J in JETP is for just energy transition. And I think that's based on this lesson learned from many countries, for example, from the yellow vests in France, protests against higher energy prices, but also from many such protests in the ASEAN countries themselves, is that you have to have justice. If it's unfair or seen as unfair, or if it's too abrupt, it's difficult to carry out changes. But so I think that's a very positive development, or positive attempt to help out. But unfortunately, I wonder if it's too focused on justice. So you need justice. You need it because justice is morally important, and you need it because if it's too unjust, you're going to get protests, and you're not going to manage to do things at a practical level. But the problem with the JETPs and why they're not working, especially in Indonesia, maybe they're so focused on justice that they forgot the elites. And if you want to have a successful energy transition, you also need to bring the elites on board, because the elites play some role in politics and in the economy, in taking investment decisions. So you need some kind of incentivization of elites, and that doesn't seem to have been there in the JETPs. So that's something for the outside world, when it does have good intentions, as with JETPs, is to try to learn how do we bring on board local elites while also taking into account justice and vulnerable groups.
Thank you so much, Indra, for the answer. I think that's a pretty, I think it's a different side of the what has been answered from our other speakers. Is some of it is not actually giving a good impact towards the energy transition agenda in Southeast Asia. And as you said, mentioned as well, in terms of like the JETB, which is like the main project in terms of pushing these renewable energy agenda, there are some, let's say, stakeholders that is not yet involved, that if we involve them more, it could possibly boost the implementations more as well. So I think regarding the time, I think I will like to ask two more questions to our speakers. So I think the next one would be for Mas Arif. I think these two questions could be answered in one. What roles do the Indonesia government and the private sector play in achieving renewable energy targets? And what are, in terms of ISR as CSOs and leaders in energy transition, how we could immediately urge and encourage the government to implement energy transformation policies, other than simply proposing an accelerated agendas. So maybe what are the concrete steps that we could take and propose to the government using the SEAT agenda that we already have? So maybe you can answer that, Mas Aros.
Thank you, Matabina. I think the first is I will answer the question from Resita about the role of the government and also the investor. For the government, of course, we expect that the government providing a supportive environment and also policy infrastructure to align the Paris Agreement, and how we can make sure that the government can commit to 100% renewable energy, because a strong signal from government to achieve 100% renewable energy is very important to the public and also to private sector. And for private sector, policy signal is very important because they can more confident in investing for renewable energy product in this time or in the future. And for the role of investor, I'm thinking that one of that consider is the investor could investing in leapfrogging technology like solar PV, energy storage, green hydrogen, green ammonia, and even green data center. Because if I refer to a statement from IAEA executive director, the future is electrification. And then the second question is to Pak Nunus. I agree, Pak. Proposing agenda alone is not enough to take action, but we still need to address this to the ASEAN process, considering most of critics see ASEAN tend to be normative when it comes to producing joint settlement. So the discussion on the practical aspect will be crucial in the picture. And since we discuss about the regional level, I think it is important we are in the same page how we achieve this regional target. And for short term to tackle this crisis, one of possible action is electrification, like as Prabowo said in the public, he want we change diesel to solar PV about 10 gigawatt. And the second is we also can try encouraging the use of electric vehicle. And the third is electrification in the cooking sector. Yes, we can argue that most of electricity still come from coal-fired power plant, but at least at this moment, it can reduce our dependency on fossil fuel, particularly on oil and also gas. I hope uh, it uh, it answer your question, Pak.
Thank you so much, Mas Arif, for the answer. So I think because of the time constraints, I would ask one more questions, everyone. If your question is not yet answered, we will try to um, give these questions to the speakers, and we would also let you get this answer after we send the post webinar materials. So I think the last question would be from Hwajin Kim. I think I could direct this to all speakers as a closing for this moderated session. How are the +3 countries, China, Korea, Japan, expected to contribute to advancing the agenda of ASEAN this year, especially regarding energy transition and energy security? So I think, as we know, ASEAN +3 Forum is one of those forums that is scheduled in the chairship this year as well. So I think we could get the perspective from first from Pa Benny from ACE, and then from Kairos in terms of maybe is there an development or engagement for ASEAN +3 in the Philippines chairship this year. And also from Indra in terms of, I think you already answered a bit on your previous answer as well regarding China and Japan, but maybe you could elaborate more on Korea as well. And for Mas Arif, in terms of ASEAN +3, I think it's also one of the initiatives that is proposed in the CIT agenda. So I think we could you could answer about how those 3 countries could help contribute more to the energy transition agenda in the region. So I think I would like to let Pa Benny first to answer this last question, Pa.
Thank you. Yes, China, Japan, and Korea, 3 countries that have a very strong leadings in the energy efforts. Individually, ASEAN has a bilateral engagement with its and have a number of cooperation in various topics. I mentioned that with China, we have strong research on the clean energy for the region. With Korea, we are pursuing nuclear capacities development. From Japan, so we are pursuing work on the energy efficiency as well as the oil stockpiling strategy. But collectively, these 3 countries also under the platform, the ASEAN +3, where all of them is contributing, providing strong support for the regional energy cooperation. So ASEAN is really benefiting from the engagement with these 3 countries, be it at individual levels, but it's also through this multi-country platform under the ASEAN Plus. Referring back to what's happened today, in the last week, we also had a discussion with Japan, China, Korea, and other countries that how they're available to support ASEAN, sensing ASEAN energy resilience, everyone's aware that major financing initiative that Japan Power Asia, 10 billions going to be provided. Will also the support from the Korea on the supply risk assessment and access to refined products and LNG. So we are working there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Beni. So I think next one is Kairos. Yeah, regarding the engagement for ASEAN Plus 3 and how it correlates with the current agenda, Philippine chairship agendas.
Yeah, similar to what Mr. Benny said, I think inevitably the +3 in the ASEAN is almost inseparable. Beyond the ASEAN engagement, I think China, Korea, and Japan has a lot of stake, has a lot of influence already existing within the ASEAN jurisdiction because of proximity, because of influence through the years of diplomacy and trade in general. But I don't think we can say that the +3 would behave the same way across the board. I think we should also try to look at how that there would definitely be differences with how China, for example, tries to influence the energy transition vis-a-vis the obvious quite laggard Japan. I think the technology focus, the push will be very different, including the packages as well in terms of trade would be very different. That's why I really think that knowing that the +3 is there, what the ASEAN countries should do as a regional bloc, but also more importantly as individual countries, is to make sure to already plan beforehand where would they need the support the most, because then you won't be carried along by the existing supply of support, but instead you would have a more strategic engagement with the +3 in terms of technology transfer, loans, among many other things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kairos. So yeah, I think we could move to Indra for that. So yeah, I think you already mentioned about China and Japan. Maybe you could give us more insights on Korea as well.
Yeah, I don't actually know that much about South Korea and what they're doing in ASEAN. I know they're business-wise very active here, but I don't know so much about energy transition in South Korea, which might be a sign that they're not that active. I know that domestically they're kind of similar to Japan in that they've clung to fossil fuels, which they're mostly dependent upon importing, but are now beginning to try to act on that. I think for all of these actors, both for the countries themselves, including Norway, where I'm from, and from countries like Japan, South Korea, China, and so on, and for the ASEAN countries themselves, it's important to also be aware of what one might call red herrings, which are technologies which are presented as green and which may have some significant role to play in a future decarbonized energy system, but which are getting too much attention now, which don't really deserve time-wise prioritization, and which are probably going to play a much smaller role compared to a lot of other things which need attention quickly. So what I have in mind are things like carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, including green hydrogen, small modular nuclear reactors, and so on. These things may or may not play some role, but often they are presented as green solutions by actors who don't want to focus and deal with the really urgent large-scale things, which are things like solar power and batteries.
Thank you so much, Indra, for the answer. Yeah, I think, as you said, maybe for South Korea as well, with their high dependence on fossil fuels, maybe their lack of activity is also a tell that their support for Southeast Asia has not been yet that significant. So yeah, I think the last one would be for Mas Arif. So yeah, the ASEAN Plus 3 is also one of the proposed agendas in CIT. So how we could further put that into practice.
Yeah, I think it's the the answer is depend on the comparative advantage, because each country have different comparative advantage. For example, China through Belt and Road Initiative, one of the possible cooperation that can increase is in the solar PV and wind turbine manufacturing, as well as on the energy storage. And for the Japan, we have cooperation with Japan through ASEC framework. So I think we can also push on the discussion and cooperation on green hydrogen, green ammonia, and geothermal. And for South Korea, one of the idea that we can explore or discuss is like a critical mineral management, and also cooperation on green industrial cooperation, Batabina. So I think those of area cooperation can channel into the mean of implementation that's still like in Southeast Asia, covering finance, capacity building, and also technological aspect. But of course, in this cooperation is under ASEAN plus 3 framework, the further discussion that we need to address is how we can accelerate it in a manner way. Batabina?
Okay, thank you so much, Mas Arif, for the answer. I think that would be the last questions for this session. Thank you so much, everyone, for the enthusiasm and for the interaction and engagement with all of our speakers. Thank you so much also for all our speakers, Babeni, Indra, Masaros, and Kairos, for being here and share your very insightful knowledge and share the progress in terms of the Philippines chairship and the future of energy transition in Southeast Asia. Maybe before I give this floor back to our Master of Ceremony, I would like to have a quick roundup and a quick conclusion for everything that we've talked about. So I think I will highlight maybe 4 key messages from today's discussion. So the first one is the current energy crisis reinforces rather than weakens the case for accelerating renewable energy. I think we all could agree on that. The second one, regarding the Philippines chairship, with the timely momentum of the energy crisis, holds a strategic opportunity to anchor ASEAN's energy transition through coordinations and credibility as well. The third one is initiatives like APAEC and CIT offer concrete pathways, but only if backed by political will and also regional collaborations. And the last one is the importance of support and investment from global partners beyond the region, while the region itself has to back it up with clear regulations and also policies. Thank you again, all speakers and participants, for this rich discussion. I now hand the session back to our Master of Ceremony for the closing remarks. Babenita, please.
Thank you very much, Tabina, for moderating the sessions. Thank you to all participants for the excellent questions, and to our moderator, Tabina, and speakers, Pak Beni, Kairos, Indra, and Pak Arif, for their invaluable contributions, as well as to all of our attendees for your engagement. Before we reach to the end of this webinar, I remind everyone to fill in the feedback form by scanning the following QR code on this slide. We hope that today's exchange has provided valuable insights and strengthened collaborations among us. We look forward to staying in touch and continuing this very important dialogue. We encourage you to stay connected, continue the conversations, and apply the knowledge that we gained today from our distinguished speakers. On behalf of the Institute for Essential Services Reform, we truly appreciate your time and participation. We look forward to seeing you at our future events and webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.